RUSI New South Wales is an independent, apolitical, not-for-profit public education institute that, since 1888, has been promoting informed debate on and enhancing public awareness and understanding of defence and national security issues. Please note, these are rapidly changing events and the information was current at the time of writing.
Elections and political trends. In elections in Europe and elsewhere over the last couple of years, parties of the far right, such as the Alternative for Germany, have been increasingly prominent, in some countries for the first time since the fascist era ended in 1945. Italy and Hungary are now led by right-wing anti-immigration nationalists, and right-wing groups did well in the European parliamentary elections in June. But the trend is not universal. In the 2024 Indian elections, the 19th of April, the 1st of June, the right-wing Hindu nationalist government led by Narendra Modi was returned, but with a significantly reduced majority. In Britain on the 4th of July, the Conservative government of Rishi Sunak was defeated in a landslide by the centre-left Labour Party led by Sir Keir Starmer. In France, support for the far right has surged across the country as the policies of centrist President Emmanuel Macron have fallen into disfavour. Yet, despite the success Marine Le Pen's far-right national rally in the European parliamentary elections in June, this did not translate to the domestic scene in the final round of the National Assembly elections in France on the 7th of July. National Rally slipped to third place behind the left-wing Nouveau Front Populaire, which won 182 seats, and President Macron's centrist bloc, which won 168 seats. National Rally won only 142 seats. No party, however, won the majority needed to govern in its own right, so a period of instability may ensue as parties attempt to form coalitions. A minority government or coalition government may result. In Iran, an Islamic theocracy, a snap presidential election was necessitated by the death on the 19th of May of the former president, Ibrahim Raisi, a hardline theocrat, in a helicopter crash. In the final round of voting on the 5th of July, the sole moderate candidate permitted to run, Masoud Pezeshkian, won and has promised reform, including better relations with the West. In the United States, though, it is looking likely that ex-president Donald Trump will win the presidential elections in November and will reintroduce his right-wing America First policies in foreign affairs, trade, immigration, and social issues. The war in Ukraine. A month ago, with the war in Ukraine in its third year, it was looking as if Russia was slowly gaining the upper hand on land. The situation is less clear now as American, and to a lesser extent European, munitions are now flowing through to the Ukrainian front line, and more aid has been promised, including at the NATO 75th anniversary summit on the 10th of July. On the ground, fighting along the whole front remains fierce and Russia has seized a few more villages in the Donetsk Oblast near Chasiv Yar. But its new offensive in the northeast towards Kharkiv has been blunted. Neither side seems able to concentrate the combat power, munitions and troops that would be needed for a decisive breakthrough anywhere along the front. Tactics are evolving. This piece from an Australian Broadcasting Corporation television crew in Ukraine gives an insight into the evolution.
Зараз ми заїхали в зону дії ворожих FPV-дронів. Вимкнули купол, РЕП.
We're in a Ukrainian military convoy heading towards the Russian border. Nowhere here is safe. One soldier scans the sky for Russian drones.
На даний момент найбільшу загрозу в цій війні несуть саме FPV-дрони.
They're a cheap, potent weapon that's transformed the battlefield. We've been taken to a secret position 3 kilometres from the Russian front line. This is a Special Forces unit. They call themselves the Peaky Blinders after the hit TV series. Their commander is Anton.
Це почалось з мему, а потім ми прийшли до повноцінної бойової групи, в котру набираємо людей. Ось. Воюють тут всі добровольці, жодного кадрового військового в нас немає. Ось. І ми вже довели, що ефективно можемо знищувати.
The soldiers work in teams. Two send up reconnaissance drones to find the enemy. The others rig up the attack drones with bombs.
Ми зараз підготовуємо, налаштовуємо обладнання, щоб потім, коли хлопці виявлять ворога, ми могли безперешкодно і одразу працювати по ньому. Також періодично нам скидають координати місцезнаходження ворога або зі штабу, або суміжні підрозділи.
Once they've identified a target, they fly in the explosives.
We're just 3 kilometres from the Russians. You would think it would be much louder here, but it's eerily quiet, except for the sounds of drones buzzing overhead. It's very unsettling and it feels like anything could happen at any moment.
We hear a noise and rush to take cover.
Is that a glide bomb that's just gone overhead? Yes. Okay, so that's come from Russian territory.
That's it landing.
Yeah.
Not that far off.
300 metres away, we find Anton's brother Alexander. Both signed up together. Before the war, he planted strawberries for a living.
Вот эту вот дорогу просматривай.
Now he's dropping bombs. He's launching a mission to take out Russian soldiers. They catch 2 off guard who mistake his drone for one of their own.
Один з основних кроків технології, технологічного прогресу. І, звісно, подивитися, чим ми воюємо. Ми воюємо ще з автоматами радянського виробництва. І цей автомат радянського виробництва, котрому вже 40 років і котрий був зроблений під зовсім іншу війну, він ніяк не може суперничати з просто суперсучасним дивом інженерної технології. Да, з цим.
This unit has been central to holding back the Russian advance in the country's northeast. But these soldiers say they can't win the war without more Western weapons.
Звісно, нам не вистачає зброї. Нам дуже сильно не вистачає зброї, нам не вистачає техніки, нам не вистачає в цілому західної підтримки. Зброя, літаки, ПВО, снаряди дуже швидко і кардинально змінять, взагалі змінять цю ситуацію і дадуть нам перевагу на полі бою. Мені здається, війна зараз на етапі великого застою. Тобто жодна зі сторін не може продвинутись ані вперед, ані назад, звісно, відступати також ніхто не може.
As the fighting intensifies during the summer months, it appears neither side has the manpower or artillery to land a killer blow. Reporting from the front line north of Kharkiv, Catherine Diss, ABC News.
On the maritime front, Ukraine is continuing to maintain its dominant position in the Black Sea, where nearly half of the Russian Black Sea fleet has been destroyed by Ukrainian missiles and sea drones since the war began. Fleet headquarters and the remains of the previously formidable Black Sea Fleet have been forced to relocate from Sevastopol to the port of Novorossiysk, over 300 kilometers away on the Russian mainland. Novorossiysk itself continues to come under Ukrainian missile and drone attack, forcing Russia to disperse some naval ships within the Black Sea and Sea of Azov. These naval successes have enabled Ukraine to maintain the export of grain by sea, which has been vital for Ukraine's struggling economy and for food security in Africa and the Middle East. Meanwhile, Russia has continued harassing missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian cities and key infrastructure, energy grid and ports, exploiting Ukraine's degraded air defense umbrella. On the 9th of July, for example, Russian troops rained missiles down on 5 cities across Ukraine, reportedly killing 41 civilians and injuring at least 70 more. A Kiev pediatric hospital where children undergo cancer treatment was among the buildings struck. While 30 of 38 missiles were downed by Ukraine in this particular attack, lack of adequate air defense measures, including fighter aircraft, remains a major issue for Ukraine. If Ukraine is to win, it will be vital to get the long-promised US F-16 fighter jets in the air as soon as possible, along with the Mirage fighters that France promised on the 6th of June. In response to such Russian attacks, Ukraine continues to launch missile and drone attacks on Russian cities near the Russia-Ukraine border, and has deployed hundreds of long-range drones to attack infrastructure targets deep inside Russia. Attacks on Russian oil refineries have shut down around 14% of Russia's refining capacity, impacting Moscow's highly lucrative trade in refined oil products. Feeling the strain, Russia is testing a system of 21st-century barrage balloons below which nets are deployed in an attempt to counter the Ukrainian drones. NATO officials assess that Russia may be able to sustain its war economy for another 3 to 4 years. Conflicts in the Middle East. The Hamas incursion into Israel on the 7th of October, 2023, has led to conflict in Gaza, on the West Bank, on the Lebanon-Israel border, in Iraq and Syria, in the Red Sea, and in Iran. Over the last month, however, the international focus has been on Gaza, the West Bank and Lebanon. Gaza. Israel began a ground offensive in Gaza on the 27th of October, with a view to destroying Hamas and rescuing as many hostages as possible. Initially, the Israeli Defense Forces focused on northern Gaza, especially Gaza City. Once the north had been subdued, the IDF then moved to southern Gaza, especially Khan Yunis. The IDF then cleared central Gaza and now is assaulting Rafah in the far south on the Egyptian border, which had been the last remaining Hamas stronghold. Hamas, however, re-emerged in the last 3 months in previously cleared areas of north and central Gaza. Hence, the IDF had to return to these areas starting with northern Gaza. After heavy fighting, especially in Jabalia refugee camp, northern Gaza was cleared again, so the IDF focus shifted to central Gaza once more, especially the Nusayrat refugee camp, concurrent with the continuing assault on Rafah, which seems to be nearing completion now. While these IDF ground operations have been underway, the international community has become appalled by the ongoing loss of civilian life and mass destruction of civil infrastructure, which have accompanied the IDF assault on Gaza. Peace negotiations led by the United States, Egypt and Qatar have continued, culminating in a plan being championed by the US. On the 11th of June, the United Nations Security Council voted to support a US resolution backing a ceasefire plan for the war in Gaza. The two protagonists, however, did not accept the proposal. They remain far apart on their fundamental demands. For Israel, it is the complete destruction of Hamas as a political and fighting force. For Hamas, it is the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from occupied Palestinian lands. Last week, Hamas expressed a willingness to compromise on the timing for an Israeli withdrawal, and the talks recommenced on the 10th of July on this basis. But Israel so far has shown no commensurate flexibility. Notwithstanding these diplomatic activities, the war continues apace. Israel has been methodically clearing Rafah, sector by sector, first the eastern sector, then the central sector, and now the remaining western sector. With Rafah surrounded and isolated, the IDF has been able to occupy and secure a buffer zone along the full length of its southern border with Egypt. This is considered important to prevent resupply of Hamas with war material from the Sinai. Nevertheless, Hamas still keeps popping up in previously cleared areas across the enclave, and the IDF is forced to respond. It has renewed its offensive in north and central Gaza, as well as continuing it in southern Gaza. On the 9th of July, an Israeli airstrike on a multi-story house in al-Nusayrat in central Gaza killed 17 people, including 14 children and a woman, and in southern Gaza, an Israeli airstrike that hit tents of displaced families outside a school where people had gathered to watch a soccer match killed at least 29 people. On the 10th of July in northern Gaza, Israeli tanks were reported advancing through Gaza City with residents ordered to evacuate the city and fleeing under fire. The humanitarian situation in Gaza by the 10th of July remained extreme. The Israeli siege of Gaza had been further tightened. 38,243 Gazans had been killed, of whom more than half were women and children, since the war began. According to the Hamas-run health ministry, health and social services were in disarray. Key civil infrastructure, had been largely destroyed, and children were dying of malnutrition as famine spread across the enclave. The war in Gaza has evolved into urban guerrilla warfare, which both sides may be able to sustain indefinitely at different levels of intensity, unless a peace agreement can be reached. Wider conflicts in the area. Israelis are also clashing with Palestinians on the West Bank, with Hezbollah on the Lebanese border, and with Yemen's Houthis whose missiles can reach Israel. The danger of triggering a wider war in the Middle East involving Iran directly remains and threatens to draw in the US and its allies. West Bank. On the Israeli-occupied West Bank, over which the IDF provides security, clashes between Palestinian youths, Israeli settlers, and the IDF have continued over the past month. According to UN data, since the 7th of October, more than 500 Palestinians have been killed. This loss of life has attracted international concern. Adding to that concern, Israel has announced a succession of plans to build new homes in settlements in the West Bank. This is one element of a campaign to accelerate settlement expansion aimed at cementing Israeli control over the territory and preventing the establishment of a future Palestinian state as part of a two-state solution. On the 4th of July, the approval of a further 5,300 new homes was announced. Lebanon. The militant Shia organization in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah, is part of the Lebanese government and does not want war with Israel at this time. Nevertheless, it has been assisting Hamas by exchanging sufficient artillery and rocket fire with the IDF since the 7th of October to keep substantial IDF forces pinned on Israel's Lebanese northern border and forcing the evacuation of some 60,000 Israeli settlers from the border area. Israel's response has forced some 100,000 Lebanese citizens also to flee the border area. Further, Israel, using surgical missile strikes, has assassinated several key Hezbollah leaders in Lebanese towns well away from the border. Over the past month, this exchange of fire has intensified. Israel says 17 of its soldiers and 9 civilians have been killed since the 7th of October, whereas the UN puts the Lebanese death toll to date at 400. It has become increasingly clear, and has been confirmed in recent days that, as soon as the situation in Gaza has been resolved, Israel is determined to drive Hezbollah forces well back from the border area, to create a Hezbollah-free buffer zone on the Lebanese side so as to allow Israeli settlers to return to their homes along the border in relative safety. Should the IDF invade Lebanon, the IDF would find Hezbollah a far stronger and more capable opponent than Hamas. It might also lead to a wider war in the Middle East, drawing in both Iran and the United States. To avoid a wider war, US officials are seeking to reach a diplomatic solution. Yemen and Red Sea. Yemen's Houthis are Shia rebels supported by Iran, who now govern much of western Yemen bordering on the Red Sea. Incensed by Israel's attack on Gaza and in support of Hamas, since November they have been using Iranian-supplied missiles and drones to attack commercial shipping in the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Gulf of Aden, in effect closing the Suez Canal through which some 12% of global maritime trade travels. After more than 60 merchant ships had been attacked, including the deaths of 3 crewmen, by March, the danger to crews and cargoes and increased insurance costs forced most shippers to avoid the Suez Canal and to choose the longer route via the Cape of Good Hope. Possibly as a result, there have been fewer attacks since March. On the 27th of March, it was announced that the Houthis had reached a political deal with Russia and China to provide safe passage for vessels under their jurisdiction. Safe passage has also been provided for grain shipments from Ukraine destined for Sudan and other famine areas in the Middle East and Africa. An international naval coalition, led by the US, has been seeking to provide protection for commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The naval ships continue to successfully intercept many of the missiles and drones fired at the commercial vessels, but unless the Houthi bases are destroyed, the Houthi attacks are likely to continue. To this end, US and UK Air Force and naval strikes on Houthi rebel launching sites, arms caches, headquarters and the like in Yemen are continuing, but a ground assault on the bases does not appear to be in prospect. Since March, there have been fewer suitable commercial ship targets for the Houthis in the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and the Gulf of Aden. Accordingly, the Houthis, frequently coordinating attacks with the Islamic resistance of Iraq, have fired missiles and drones at naval and commercial shipping at sea and in Israeli ports, such as Eilat and Haifa. Mostly, little damage has been caused. Those non-exempted commercial ships that have braved the Red Sea route, however, often have come under attack. Most missiles and drones fired at them have been intercepted by naval escorts before reaching the target ship. A few ships, though, have been less lucky. Sudan. Sudan is a country of 50 million people, and a civil war there, which has been ongoing for 15 months, since the 15th of April, 2023, has created a humanitarian crisis on a scale comparable to, or exceeding those in Ukraine and Gaza. The civil war is between rival factions in the Sudanese military government, the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, under General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, under Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, aka Hemedti. Most fighting has been concentrated around the capital, Khartoum, and in the Darfur region in the country's west. By March 2024, conservative estimates put the number killed at 14,000 to 15,000 with 33,000 others injured. On the 2nd of May, a U.S. Senate hearing estimated that 15,000 to 30,000 had been killed, but considered this an underestimate, saying the real death toll could be as high as 150,000. As of the 5th of July, 7.7 million had been internally displaced, greater than 2.1 million had fled the country as refugees, and perhaps up to 25 million, half the population, were facing starvation. Despite its own problems, Ukraine donated 7,665 tons of wheat to Sudan in March. On the 9th of March, the UN Security Council called for an immediate ceasefire in Sudan to coincide with the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, and to allow aid to get to the 25 million people in desperate need of food, the humanitarian response now being at breaking point. All parties were called on to seek a sustainable resolution of the conflict through dialogue. This call was ignored by the belligerents. As of the 5th of July, the war has continued unabated, with the RSF having the upper hand in Darfur and Khartoum, with the SAF operating from Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast and seeking to challenge the RSF in its strongholds. The humanitarian situation remains dire. New Caledonia. Tensions in the French territory of New Caledonia remain high, driven by the desire of the indigenous Kanak people for independence from France, whereas the predominantly right-wing settlers desire to retain the present constitutional arrangements. Following earlier unrest and rioting in May, on the 26th of June, a fresh surge of unrest hit New Caledonia, with several buildings in Numi set on fire overnight, including a police station and a town hall. The new spike in violence came as France prepared to vote in National Assembly elections. It was feared that the outcome could affect the currently vexed question of New Caledonian independence, should a right-wing government be elected and oppose change to the present constitutional arrangements. Given the relative success of left and centre parties in the French election, the Kanak fears may be put on hold for the present. Global climate change. Global climate change, which poses an existential threat to humankind, is continuing unabated relentlessly. Global average temperatures have been at, or above the Paris Agreement target of 1.0 degrees Celsius, 12 months in a row. June 2024 was the Earth's hottest June on record, with deadly heat waves spanning large parts of the northern hemisphere where, in places, the temperature exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. For example, in Saudi Arabia, some 1,300 people died last month from heat-related diseases during the Hajj pilgrimage, with temperatures in Mecca climbing to 51.8 degrees Celsius. With chances of mitigating climate change diminishing, learning to live with these changes is becoming a massive challenge with major geostrategic implications.
This strategic update was produced by David Leese, Chair of the RUSI New South Wales Special Interest Group on Strategy. The SIG Strategy Group seeks to enhance knowledge of strategy, including the evolution of strategic thought, maintain awareness of current geostrategic issues, and undertake research on nominated issues of current strategic interest. A more detailed strategic review is published each month in RUSI's newsletter, which is available on the RUSI New South Wales website. Thank you.